That sound of sputtering engines? That's what a lot of car and bike owners across India are hearing lately. For months now, people are complaining of falling mileage and vehicle breakdowns due to the use of E20 blended petrol.
I drive a Volkswagen Virtus. I was driving down Gurgaon and the car suddenly broke down. The engine just shut off. Next day, the representative told me that I have a faulty pump issue. Apparently, there were 20 plus cars in the same service center with the same issue because of ethanol fucking blending.
15 दिन में इसका पूरा कार्बोरेटर खराब हो गया, टंकी पूरा अंदर सड़ गया,
पूरा इसमें तनिक का कचरा भर गया,
ऐसा लग रहा है गन्ने का जूस अंदर।
कोरोजन देख लो, हर जगह जंग लग रही है, इसमें यहाँ देख लो कितनी जंग लग रही है।
E10 कार ओनर्स या E0 कार ओनर्स को दो मेजर प्रॉब्लम्स आ रहे हैं। इंजेक्टर में प्रॉब्लम आ रहा है, दूसरा कोई गाड़ियों के फ्यूल टैंक में रस्टिंग हो रही है।
अभी रिसेंटली मेरी 2022 की गाड़ी 2 दिन पहले ही बीच रास्ते में खराब हो गई और बाद में पता चलता है कि मेरी गाड़ी के स्पार्क प्लग उड़ गए। सर्विस सेंटर वाले ने बताया कि ये फ्यूल में एडल्ट्रेशन की वजह से भी हो सकता है। तो पहले E20 की वजह से मेरी सारी माइलेज खराब हुई और अभी ये स्पार्क प्लग का खर्चा।
But the government has repeatedly dismissed these claims.
There are 20 crore two-wheelers on the road. There are 20 lakh four-wheelers using that fuel on the road. There are the automobile manufacturers. There are the people who service the cars. They all say there is no difficulty. Ethanol, they use it in racing cars also. The acceleration increases. Mileage, yes, it may drop a little. Mileage can drop a little because of various things. If you're driving from here to Gurugram, and if you follow the route I follow, then there are many points at which there are toll bridge, other things. So calculate that. So we've been very open about it.
भारत सरकार ने ये निर्णय लिया था कि नवंबर 2022 तक 10% एथेनॉल ब्लेंडिंग कर लेंगे। ये जो हमारा ऑब्जेक्टिव था ये 5 महीने पहले ही हो गया था। दूसरा हमने ऑब्जेक्टिव कहा 20% एथेनॉल ब्लेंडिंग वो 2030 तक होगी, वो भी हमने 5-6 साल पहले कर लिया।
Suddenly the entire ecosystem of setting targets changed. They said you don't have to wait for 2030 because you would got the winning formula. Why we did it several years in advance? Because it was a successful experiment. We're going to be selling E85 20 rupees cheaper than normal E20.
You always, when you have choice, you go from what you have to something better. I have never heard of choice being asked for to go back into something which is more toxic.
E20 is fully rolled out. Where is the question of going slow on E20?
so you're not going to lower the
from E20 down? Absolutely no. It's in no one's interest. We will go towards E25, but after we've tested the vehicles, we had never decided on E25 and going back from E20 out of the question.
इथेनॉल से कोई पोल्यूशन की आज भी देश में जहाँ फैक्ट्रीज है, हाँ, किसी के प्रति तकरार नहीं है। इथेनॉल एक पूरा 100% ग्रीन फ्यूल है।
पेट्रोल का चेहरा ही नहीं देखना हम तो इसको कब बंद करेंगे इसके पीछे लगे, क्योंकि पोल्यूशन भी है और आर्थिक समस्या है। अगर आपको संभव हुआ तो धीरे धीरे अब तो इथेनॉल के पंप पूरी साहब ने बोल दिया सब खुल जाएंगे, हर पेट्रोल पंप पे इथेनॉल होगा।
गाड़ियां बिगड़ सकती है, रोड में भी कई प्रॉब्लम आ सकते हैं, भाई दावा नहीं कर सकते कभी आएंगे नहीं, पर इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि आप हर बार वो इथेनॉल डाला उस मशीन के कारण आए।
Ethanol blending has so far saved India over 1.9 lakh crore rupees in foreign exchange, reduced carbon emissions, and increased farmers' income. But before we cheer these outcomes, let's understand that we are paying the same price for E20 as we were paying for petrol before. And there are some other questions that need answers. Is an increased ethanol blended petrol good for our car's health? Why blend ethanol when India is pushing for electric and CNG vehicles? And since ethanol is a plant-based fuel, would it be a threat to our food and water security? In this episode, I decode whether E20 is as good for our cars as it is for the environment and India's fuel bill. Joining me are Bharati Balaji, Deputy Director General at the All India Distillers Association, Randheer Singh, former Director NITI Aayog and CEO ForeSee Advisors, and my colleague Shally Seth Mohile, who covers the auto sector at the Economic Times. It's Thursday, the 16th of July. I'm Kalpana Pathak, and this is the Morning Brief. First, the basics. India didn't invent ethanol blending. 100 years ago, Henry Ford used ethanol in his Model T, the first affordable car. But mixing ethanol with petrol came by only during World War II, when fuel was in short supply. In fact, countries have run vehicles on ethanol petrol mixes for decades, with US and Brazil having 84% of global share. India has been blending ethanol into petrol for more than a decade now. Most vehicles built in the last decade were engineered with that blend in mind, and it caused relatively few problems. The leap to E20 is different in scale, and the government's own numbers admit there's a cost. In 2021, the NITI Aayog laid a clear roadmap. Vehicles actually built for E20 lose somewhere around 1 to 2% in mileage. Older vehicles, the ones still running on India's roads by millions, can lose anywhere from 6 to 7% mileage for cars and 3 to 4% for two-wheelers. According to a survey by local circles, 6 in 10 owners of petrol vehicles purchased between 2023 and 2024 have seen a mileage drop by 10% since 2025. The survey covered 22,000 vehicle owners across India. So if a fuel gives you fewer kilometers per litre, by logic it should be cheaper, right? Well, that was the original plan. The 2021 roadmap recommended pricing ethanol blends below pure petrol with tax relief to cushion the difference for consumers. But that pricing promise never really materialized. Owners are still paying the full price for the fuel. My colleague Shally and I spoke to Randheer Singh, former Director NITI Aayog and CEO ForeSee Advisors, on where we went wrong in rolling out the E20 plan, especially given there was a clear roadmap laid out by the country's biggest think tank. Here's Randheer.
So, shortly, I should talk about the roadmap also, which was prepared by the expert committee which anchored at NITI. It has 4 safeguards. First one, keep E10 available as a protection fuel, a safety net for older vehicles. Number 2 was roll out E20 in phases from 2023 onwards, starting with ethanol surplus states. Third one was sequence the vehicles. First, E20 ready vehicles should come from April 2023, then fully E20 tuned engines from 2025. And finally, fourth, give the consumer a tax break at the pump. Because of course, ethanol carries less energy per liter, which I just talked about. The report also talked about that it results in the reduction of 6 to 7% of mileage drop in the older cars. Now, where the rollout finally deviates, it deviates at 3 places. In fact, in almost all the 4 places, E20 didn't arrive alongside regular petrol. It replaced it. So the safety net for older vehicles never really materialized. Second, the price relief never came. You pay the same price for slightly less energy. And the third, the rollout finished 5 years early. But the most important part, the communication to consumers, the labeling, the warranty clarity, all of that is lagged behind the fuel. In one line, I can say destination was right, the speed was impressive, but finally the passenger briefing was incomplete.
So now that we are in the middle of it and we have seen the kind of backlash which this whole execution has met with, what is the way out? Because the government on its part has been saying that our petroleum minister has been on record to say that there's no going back and this is here to stay and it is not possible to offer multiple grade fuel at the pumps because it's not economical. So what's the way forward?
If I just split the vehicles into the 2 segments, the vehicles which were bought after April 2023, they are E20 ready. But the vehicle before that, the ethanol has lesser energy. And in fact, the ARAI says 3 to 4% reduction. But actually, on road, we have seen the people claiming around 15 to 20% drops. In fact, you just run your AC in summer, it in itself costs around 10%. So for the general public, what I can say, ethanol absorbs moisture over time. The rubber seals are going to be damaged. The hoses in very old fuel systems will suffer the damages. In addition to this, you cannot keep your fuel sitting in the tanks for months. Having said that, I would appeal from the government side that first the vehicles should come, then the fuel should come. So first you make the vehicles ready and then the fuel ready. Plus, in addition to this, instead of replacing all the pumps with the E20, there has to be option for E10 ready fuels also. Not at a very high price. Right now, we are seeing almost at a double price is what is being available. But it should be the one which should be the baseline. And the E20 can be, sold as one of the option very clearly marked. And in some of the countries, this has been done also. We see the example of Brazil, wherein first they made the vehicles ready and it evolved over the period of time.
Any
And
sense
From
of the pricing that you can give us when you're saying that it should be lower? And can you quantify the impact that you're saying?
So let's say if ethanol is being procured at 70, 71 or 72 rupees per liter.
Mm.
So I think, and let's say petrol is right now around 100, and if you mix 20% of that, so the impact should be around 7 to 8 rupees at least lower.
so, who bears the cost? For now, I understand talking to auto companies that a lot of the service centers at auto companies are quietly replacing the part, even though the vehicles are out of the warranty period. But how long can auto companies bear that cost?
I would say eventually the cost is on the consumer. I don't think OEMs can continue replacing the parts on a frequent basis for such a large number of vehicles. Going forward in next 7 to 8 months after continuous usage, I don't think OEMs are going to service those vehicles and replace the parts. So finally, it's the consumer who has to finally bear the cost for sure. And this is not going to be a small cost. In fact, the small car owners, I mean, the vehicles are older ones, they have to shell out the money.
What do you think is it going to do to the whole ethanol roadmap, which was originally suggested?
All this is going to give a multiple signal to the automakers, to the industry also. Today, automaker is being asked to invest in E20 engines, flex
Right.
fuel vehicles, EVs, CNG, hybrid, and all at once. And when E20 to E27 to E30, E85, E8, E100, even buyers will get confused too. Dealers are going to tell you that customers are choosing EV simply because that policy feels most predictable. But here's my 2 cents. India is one market. So the right answer for a scooter in a small town, an auto rickshaw in Delhi, and let's say a sedan in Mumbai are three different answers. Brazil runs ethanol and EVs side by side. Europe does E10. I mean, now electrification is also very aggressive in Europe. So no serious or the big country can actually pick just one horse. There has to be some clarity from one or two perspective. You cannot ask manufacturers to manufacture hundreds of different fuel system, and you can create the infrastructure supporting that, because it's not only the vehicles which has to come on road. We are talking about now the chargers for the EVs. There has to be a considerable amount which has to go for the chargers. It makes no sense that you ask again the same OEMs. In fact, HPCL, BPCL, IOCL are also putting up charging infrastructure on their petrol pumps. You ask them to put flex fuel also in the same pump, the normal fuel also on the same pump, E20 on the same pump, and power or something also on the same pump. So just think about the situation, what type of signal this gives finally.
A lot of chaos and confusion.
Maybe just one more line, that they should now tell the industry today itself when E25 or E30 is going to arrive, which fuel will be at which pumps. And they have to definitely keep EV incentives stable till their finally sunset dates arrive. Automakers has to have certainty about the technology. They need certainty about the calendar also. If you promise that it will come in 2030, it should come in 2030. If you say vehicles will roll out in April 2023, it rolled out in 2023. So they kept their promises. But government also needs to keep their promises for the consumers.
Mr. Singh, if you could help us understand, looking 10 years ahead, what would a successful Indian clean mobility story would look like to you?
Let's talk about the three countries and three lessons from the Indian picture side. One is the Brazil is actually the proof that it works. So they have moved to mandatory E30 in August 2025 and sell pure ethanol at the pump. But we have to be wary of when and how they did it. 50 years of continuity. And this is the key, about 90% of their cars are flex fuel. That means they can run on any plant. So Brazil raised the fuel only after the fleet could handle it. In India, we did E20 fuel first. My suggestion is for E27 and E30, we must flip that. First fleet, then the fuel. America is again the second tail. They are stuck at E10 for decades because the consumer never had an economic reason to go higher. So infrastructure without incentives, it goes nowhere. Next is Europe and China. They teach the EV lesson very clearly. Electrification is scaled fastest where policy dates were stable in both the Europe and China. Policy dates were very stable, and the predictability I can call is as the incentive. And from the consumer perspective, I can only say one thing, that there has to be a clear planned data. There has to be a warranty certainty, transparent pricing, and every milestone should be with a data test. It should be calendarized. I think if we do this, then E20 controversy would subside.
Mr. Singh, the All India Distillers Association was saying that there is a gap between what the consumer knows and what the government wants to convey to them. So there needs to be a campaign to educate the consumer. How far do you think that could be true?
Definitely the transparency has to be there, but it could not be the sole reason for sure. For consumers, it's very simple. If they themselves are experiencing it, it doesn't matter who is going to come and tell them. It's a first-hand experience, right? If you and me are driving a car and we are experiencing the effects on our car in terms of the maintenance, in terms of the fuel efficiency, in terms of, how the car runs, whether it's going to be, bumpy ride or what, then definitely no matter how much campaign happens, that's not going to impact the consumers per se. And in fact, what everybody will need is the certainty on the warranty and the pricing. Let's say if the OEMs comes forward and says, okay, no matter whether your vehicle is in warranty or not in warranty, if the the damage is because of the E20 fuel for the next 2 years or next 3 years or the next 4 years, we are going to replace the parts directly related with the E20 fuel, the corrosion or impacted by the E20, we are going to replace it free of cost, including the labor cost. Then I think those are the things which will help consumers to get their fears out.
Also, it was said that E10 petrol would be available alongside E20 as an option for older vehicles. But so far in India, that option is not available, leaving many owners with a single choice at the pump, whether their vehicle's engine is designed for it or not. The Automotive Research Association of India conducted a detailed study on E20's effects on vehicles and found that when vehicles built for E10 run on E20, components like rubber hoses, gaskets, and seals can degrade faster. Shally spoke to Santosh Iyer, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at the luxury car maker Mercedes-Benz India, to seek the automaker's stance on E20.
We are quite clear the cars were materially compliant much earlier and emission compliant from 23-24 anyway. What's happening today is there is another problem getting added because of E20, which is adulteration of fuel that we find in many of the fuel stations across India. And there, maybe some of them are using the garb of ethanol and consumers not knowing that they have filled an adulterated fuel or it is causing because of an E20 issue or something.
Around the same time as the E20 rollout, the government announced zero excise duty on future ethanol blends. But that move helps oil marketing companies, ethanol manufacturers, sugar mills, and grain-based distilleries that supply the ethanol. In fact, today India is flush with ethanol and is planning to export the same. So have we really thought through this whole transition from E10 to E20? That's the question I put to Bharati Balaji of All India Distillers Association. Here's Balaji.
What has happened is when the ethanol blending program started in 2004, we didn't anticipate the glut that we're sitting in 2026, surely. When it primarily started, it started only for sugar industry. Mm-hmm. And at that point of time, sugar industry was in a bad situation. So therefore, the entire ethanol blended program did help not only the farmers, the industry, but also the nation at large. And when the government realized that the program is, working and sustaining very well, the government started expanding the feedstock basket to not only sugarcane, but went to the grains part, particularly the broken, damaged rice and your maize. And then, thanks to various incentives and subsidies provided by the government, that many of the distillers entered the industry, expanded the current distillery capacities, and the new ones entered the more number of plants, and that's how we are sitting on a surplus capacities today.
So, could that be one of the reasons why India actually advanced the ethanol blending program? And do you feel there is substantial amount of savings in due to this, as the government is claiming?
Yes, there is quite a lot of savings. And if I have to break it down to the numbers, from 2014-15 onwards, Kalpana, we've saved around 1.9 lakh crore in foreign exchange. The money which otherwise would have been spent on importing crude oil, we have also substituted the crude oil import to 289 lakh metric tons. That is nearly 28.9 million tons of crude oil imports have been avoided due to ethanol replacing a portion of petrol. So roughly around 17 to 18,000 crores saved every year on average. So this is on the foreign exchange and CO2 emissions. Well, if we talk about payment to farmers, again, around 1.7 lakh crores have been paid to the farmers from 15-16 onwards. Instead of relying solely on food or sugar markets, farmers now have an additional buyer for sugarcane, maize, damaged food grains, and other approved feedstocks. So this program now has generated not only the payment dues which went to farmers, but also an additional income, strengthening the rural economy and encouraging investment in agriculture.
Great. So, the E20 target was originally set for 2030, but we achieved it in mid 2026. What drove the accelerated timeline, and was 5 years enough to prepare supply chains and vehicles properly?
Yes. So the government's interest in evaluating E25 or E30 is driven by three broad objectives. First, reducing dependence on imported crude oil and increasing the use of domestically produced renewable fuels and continuing progress towards India's climate commitments. However, it is important to note that no decision has yet been taken to adopt E25 or E30 nationally. The government has asked ARAI, Automotive Research Association of India, to scientifically evaluate E25 on existing vehicles before any policy decisions. Like, as I said, India's annual petrol consumption is around 4,000 to 5,000 crore liters. Moving from E20 to E30 would require roughly 400 to 450 crore liters of additional ethanol annually, depending on the total petrol demand. So today we're sitting on around 2,000 crore liters, and out of which 1,100 crore liters is what the OMCs procure. We're still sitting of around 900 crore liters. Even if we minus the around 350 crores liters for the potable alcohol and industrial alcohol, we're still sitting with a lot of surplus on it. And so therefore, on the capacity side, there are no concerns at all. And we are very well prepared to supply much more. However, there is a gap now, which is focus should be more on the demand side of the entire program than the production and supply side. So when I'm saying demand, there has to be a number of cars ready, flex fuel cars ready, the compatible engines ready, infrastructure or rolling out more number of the dispensing stations and logistics, storage, etc. is something which is more important. But the utmost point again would be looking at the current scenario, the consumer awareness on the entire ethanol and its advantages.
Great. So a couple of follow-up questions here, Bharati. When you're saying that the government has asked ARAI and other agencies to test, we are also talking about E85 and E100. How far is that in that case if we are only talking about testing E35 right now?
E8500 is definitely, in terms of the policy, there is a foundation laid by the government, but that is not the the entire picture. That's just the beginning. What is needed to be followed up is the many number of OEMs to come out in the market. I think Maruti has already showed that they have launched the E85, and I think
Yes.
Toyota is also launching by this year end, and so has two-wheelers like Hero MotoCorp and many others who are coming in the market. So
Okay.
one is the more number of vehicles, and definitely there will be a much more push for the OEMs to roll out more number of flex fuel vehicles when the associations are working on it. Especially IDA has already written to the government to exempt or reduce GST from 20 to 40% bracket to at least 5% to 12%. Because if you see vehicles like EVs, they all come in the bracket of 5%. And the second, even the state governments, state to state, will have to come down on your road tax and registration taxes, etc., which also forms a big part in the overall pricing mechanism. If you notice, Kalpana, I don't know if you're aware, Sikkim is the first state in the country to
Yes.
exempt road and registration tax on all cleaner vehicles. And we're
Yes.
seeking that other states follow the suit. Very much similar to Sikkim model. So one, this is on the costing part. Besides that, of course, you need more number of dispensing stations and storage capacities, which should be done in a staggered manner, which I believe is in the roadmap, which will be coming out in a staggered phase. And then the existing capacities which are going to expand, and there are new distilleries coming out in the pipeline, which are around 35, 40 of them still coming out with the plants. So they need, again, encouragement and policy handhold in the long run, whether in terms of feedstock sustainability and the pricing of raw material linked to the final ethanol pricing, etc. So this is what is needed for E85, E100 to plan out in next 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years. Okay. And when
Yeah.
you mention that, that we have surplus and the demand side of the program needs to be addressed, what are we planning to do with the surplus that we have?
Yes, that's a very important question, Kalpana, because that's a very big concern from the industry right now. The bigger groups are still able to manage somehow, but there are smaller players in the market who cannot survive because the capacities that one has and just locking up in stores, losing the capital on that. So, of course, there is a industrial and potable alcohol section which is there, but we are also seeking for exports because that would help in the interim period to move out some surplus from the country. And as you see, there are many countries which have opened up 10% mandate, including your Nepal, Bangladesh, Indonesia, etc. So we feel that we should move some surplus ethanol, and that will help in the temporary period for all the distilleries in terms of the surplus.
And how much can be exported to? And do these countries have demand for ethanol?
The 10% ethanol blending mandate is there, but they do not have domestic availability of the ethanol, particularly coming from the feedstock. So therefore, they're looking at importing ethanol. And once the government allows exports, and hoping that the international commercial viability is there, and then we look at exporting ethanol.
How much can we
Interim
export?
period. So
Of
we're
our
sitting on
surplus?
around 700 crore liters currently, Kalpana.
Okay.
In the country. So that is where
Okay.
we are looking at. So let's see how much is it allowed in that.
Great. I wanted to ask you one thing, Bharati. When we're talking about surplus ethanol, we saw that a couple of months back, few distilleries in Bihar shut down. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of investments that people had put into had gone bad. So, what is the current situation right now? If we are talking of surplus going forward, how are the distilleries looking at ethanol?
Overall, the spirit is very high, primarily because there are always positive signals from the government. If you see in 2026, at least 7 notifications have been out from the government.
Okay.
Your
Okay.
BI standards, which have been evaluated up to E22, 25, 27, and E30 are taking place. Then there is, of course, rollout of flex fuel vehicles, E85, E100. Then we have CAFE norms, which are still under discussions. There is excise duty, which is cut. Of course, as I said, there is some private players of OMCs, and then there are some industrial demand, which is, though that's not much remunerative as much as, ethanol is, but they're still supplying towards the industrial sector, chemical sector, alcohol sector. So that's how it is being taken care of, the surplus.
Taking a little detour, Bharti, water is one aspect of ethanol that is being talked about a lot. So, can you give us a sense of what is the actual water footprint of ethanol production, and how does the government respond to viral claims that may be exaggerating or understanding this?
This is a very important question, Kalpana, and one that I feel deserves a nuanced answer rather than a simplistic one. First, we need to distinguish between water used in agriculture and water used in ethanol production. These are often combined in public discussions, leading to misleading conclusions that we were just referring to. The distillery process itself has become significantly more water efficient over the years. So today, if you see modern Indian distillers typically require around 4 liters of fresh water to produce 1 liter of ethanol. And many are continuously working to reduce this even further through improved process efficiency, like water recycling, and then there is ZLD, zero liquid discharge systems. However, many studies quote much larger footprints because they include the entire life cycle from cultivating your crops, that is sugarcane, maize, or rice, to the final liter of ethanol. So, while life cycle assessment is a legitimate scientific tool, it must be applied consistently across products. So, for example, if you calculate the water footprints of ethanol by including crop cultivation, then the same methodology should be used for other agricultural and industrial products. For instance, a meter of dyed cotton fabric can consume 5,000 to 6,000 liters of water over its life cycle. Similarly, rice, wheat, sugar, and many other processed foods have all substantially embedded water footprints. So looking only at ethanol in isolation can therefore create a very distorted perception. See, India's farmers cultivate sugarcane, maize, and rice also for food, feed, sugar, starch, and other uses. Ethanol definitely provides an additional value chain for surplus and alternate grade produce. It does not create the agricultural economy by itself. So industry recognizes that water is a precious resource and is actively investing in technologies to reduce freshwater consumption. There are CPCB guidelines which mandate to do that. The industry has adopted zero liquid discharge systems for maximum water recycling. We've increased process water recovery and reuse. Then there are ACHE, something called as air-cooled heater exchange in place of our conventional cooling towers, where technically feasible to reduce the water demand. And besides this, rainwater harvesting is there to supplement the freshwater requirements. So continuous improvements in process efficiency to further reduce water consumption per liter of ethanol is happening.
Okay. The other aspect of ethanol blending, Bharti, is that there's a lot of distrust among public. I wanted to ask you, why has public trust lagged so far behind the technical assurances from oil companies and industry bodies?
Well, what has happened is, Kalpana, that when the program started, like I just said, industry wasn't very sure whether there would be any long-term policy, because every time the policy would come, there were some gaps. And coming from an industry perspective, there were hiccups initially, whether we should participate in the program or not. And the entire focus was more on policy and along with that industry on production and supply. And then here you realize when government is completely supporting with various schemes and more number of distillers in the market. And then you come to this place where you feel that there is a gap today between the supply focused industry, the policy focused industry, and between the OEMs and the industry is the consumer knowledge, which I think was a gap. There have been now misinformation and completely distorted versions which are being circulated across the various print, social media. And of course, I understand many of the laymen out there who have not much of knowledge are getting carried away by it. But all I definitely urge for consumers today is, and assure at least, that there are no such malfunctions in the engines. The engines prior to 2023 certainly has a very minor efficiency droppage around 3 to 3.6%. But going beyond that, all vehicles are E10, E20 compatible, compliant, you will see. So obviously fuel should be refilled as per the compatibility of the vehicle, if it is E20. And going forward, we are also urging for old vehicles to come out with some sort of a package from the government to convert. So definitely there's a lot of work going on this, and insurance claims that we've been hearing on one of the part is that there is no insurance. I think insurance companies
Yes.
have come out and given that statement. So there is much misinformed data out there, Kalpana, and we are working to clear that.
Bharati, do you think that we as a country rushed into higher blends of ethanol because we had surplus capacity? Because when we look at Brazil as an example, and which is cited often, Brazil took many years to gradually increase ethanol blending, right? For the vehicles to be fully compliant to ethanol. I think they gave nearly 3 decades for their citizens and consumers to convert. But India is moving from 2014, from when we started expediting this, and today's just in 12 years we are moving from E5 to E30, and then beyond is what we are talking about. So do you think that we should have given more time to Indian consumers, Indian users, to convert to higher blends of ethanol?
Kalpana, definitely we feel consumers should be given a paramount choice. End of the day, consumer, when they walk into a petrol pump, should decide which fuel they need in their engine, whichever is compatible towards, whether it's E20, E30, or complete petrol, or a blend, certainly. I don't think we rushed it, because this is the time that government is not just laying out or increasing any blends without any studies. And unlike Brazil model, Brazil is a successful model in the country. But if you notice Brazil and India, the major difference is a feedstock. Brazil has done only on sugarcane throughout, and they don't have any other feedstock. Whereas in a country like India, today we have rice and grains, maize and sugarcane, and going forward maybe much more. So therefore there is no concern in that feedstock, and there is no concern on the ethanol distillers or the producers of ethanol, and the car manufacturers. Definitely car manufacturers could have rolled out much more earlier, but now there has to be certain policies for them to see that it will work in a sustainable manner. And now you will see many more OEMs, two-wheelers, four-wheelers coming out in the market. The higher blends, I'm saying, will not happen overnight. It will happen in a staggered manner. It will not be imposed on consumers. Consumers will be given a choice. In fact, one of the asked by the IDA is that we should have green energy pumps, meaning thereby the distillers could have their own pumps wherein we dispense the higher blends, which is a base blend, or E85, E100, or the mixed blend, very similar to the model of Brazil, where they decide as per the pricing what is the choice of fuels that the consumer decides.
Bharati, I wanted to get your views or comments on the contention that the consumer has, that since it's E20, it's 20% ethanol and 8% petrol, the price of petrol has not come down for the consumer. Any comments that you have on that?
The price of the fuel should come down, definitely, because if you see the total 100, if you're talking about 20%, the 20% of the ethanol which is substituted to the petrol is a saving in itself.
Yes.
So overall, in a long run, because currently the petrol prices are fluctuating as per the geopolitical scenario, and overall in the long run, it will be passed on to the consumer. And you've seen the example in E85, which is almost 20 rupees lesser than the. So therefore, when it comes down to E25 or E30, as we go higher in a longer run, you will see that there will be a change in the pricing also.
But E85 is not there right now, right? That's an announcement that the ministry has made.
E85 is there. It's just that the dispensing petrol stations across currently would be around 150, 200 in India. There's been a timeline and 5,000 pumps by next year end. This year, I think 2,000 by December, and next year end, you'll have 5,000 dispensing stations. So E85 is pretty much rolled out. Lesser number of dispensing stations, but the pricing and everything is out.
Okay. As IDA, what are the measures that your organization is proposing to facilitate wider adoption of ethanol, also given the fact that we are sitting on a surplus right now?
As I mentioned, the most important is exports. And besides that, from IDA, we are also working on diversifying of the entire ethanol, just slowly dependent on the fuel purposes, but also working on ethanol, diesel, ethanol cooking stove. That's another one which we should be hearing some progressive news going forward. That's something where the entire Nigeria and South Africa have been working since 18 years, have been using ethanol cooking stove. These are some areas which we feel that we should diversify and look into for consumption of ethanol besides only for fuel purposes.
Great. Just last question, Bharati. The government cites significant avoided CO2 emissions from blending. Does that figure account for the full life cycle emission of grain cultivation, land use, and fertilizer inputs?
Yes, absolutely. See, modern sustainability assessments increasingly use LCAs rather than only tailpipe emissions. So, life cycle analysis includes your crop cultivation, fertilizer use, transportation, fuel distribution, and combustion. So the actual carbon reduction therefore varies by feedstock, agricultural practices, energy source used in the distillery, or process efficiency. That is why improving sustainability throughout the value chain remains an ongoing priority. And if we talk about so far, we've avoided greenhouse gas emission by the entire program of over 700 lakh metric tons of carbon dioxide cumulative. These are the reports, sources by the government. So that certainly is, we're looking at the LCA, carbon dioxide emissions.
India's vehicle fleet is old. Legal life of a vehicle on the road is 15 years. This means majority of the vehicles plying today are not E20 compatible. So does that mean scrap ethanol blending altogether? Not really. The only way out could be to adopt a slower and more thought-through transition, because the confusion E20 has created makes one wonder about the rollout of higher stages of ethanol blending, including E35, E85, and E100. What is also needed is creating awareness among the public about ethanol blended fuel and keeping a lower ethanol option available for older vehicles, the way Brazil still does after 3 decades. Pricing ethanol blended petrol cheaper is also important. Because why should consumers pay the price for a transition that's been rolled out faster than the roadmap itself laid out? That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by Anirban Chaudhary, sound designed by Amrit Reji and Rajas Naik. Keep listening to The Morning Brief and our other shows, including Corner Office Conversation, wherever you get your podcast. All external clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.